Hey everyone, quick pre-episode note on our Rumcast Guide to Guyana Rum. So we recorded this in one marathon 3-hour recording session and decided to break it up into 2 episodes, part 1 and part 2, just to make it a little bit easier on everybody. So this week we're releasing part 1, and next week you'll get part 2, so no 2-week gap between the 2 episodes. You'll get the second part pretty quickly. Anyway, happy listening. Here's part 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rumcast. We are the podcast that talks all things rum-related with the people who love and shape it. My name is John Gulla. With me hosting is Will Hookinga. And today, Will, we have a special episode lined up where you and I are going to be talking not with another person, not about a specific rum release, but about a place, an origin.
That's right.
And that place is the legendary rum origin of Guyana in a return to our Guide to series. Are you excited?
I'm really excited because we've been getting requests for many months now. When are you guys going to do the next, Rumcast Guide to Country X? Because we've done a number of these over the years. We've done Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Mexico.
I can't remember the other ones.
The United States.
The United States. That's what it was.
And I think there have been at least one other so far, but these are always really fun. We try to give, I was kind of thinking how to describe these because it's not like a deep dive into history and things like that. It's more like, I think if you're a rum enthusiast right now, what are kind of like, how do you get the lay of the land with this place? What's out there that's interesting from a context standpoint? What's notable about this origin and the distilleries there? It's really, I think, trying to help people explore whatever the country is, the rums that are available, and also get a sense of like, how does this rum fit into the global landscape of rum right now? So it's really more of like a present day. It's not a deep dive into history. We do try to point people to like great resources if you want to do the full history of everything, rum related in this place. These are some things to check out, and we'll definitely do that. But John, when we talk about Guyana rum, what are we really talking about?
Well, nowadays we're talking about one single distillery, right? And that's Demerara Distillers Ltd, or often referred to as DDL.
Yes, they are the owners of Diamond Distillery. That's always like the interesting thing. Like when we talk about these rums, it's like people usually say DDL, but like the distillery is called Diamond. But
Diamond.
I feel like you don't hear Diamond Distillery as much, but it's a cool name. So Diamond Distillery, it's located right or like on the edges of Georgetown, which is the capital of Guyana. As you mentioned, it's the only remaining rum distillery right there on the Demerara River, which flows into the Caribbean just a few miles away. They own and produce El Dorado and Diamond Reserve brand of rums, and they also sell rum to, they do some direct selling to third-party brands and then also some bulk sales as well. So I think listeners will be familiar with a lot of brands like Pusser's, Hamilton, Woods, Lamps, a lot of those kind of like Navy-style rums from the UK. A lot of them get rum from DDL as well. So you can encounter their stuff in other brands, but really what we're going to be focusing on in the episode is El Dorado rums and some of like the independently bottled rums that they've done over the years. So the question, I think, is there's a lot of places we still haven't done these episodes about. So why are we choosing to do a guide on Guyana or Demerara rum? And if there's only one distillery there, do we really need a guide for it? Like, what's the deal? Why are we choosing to do this one right now?
I mean, I think it's the right question to ask, and there are clearly some good reasons here. And as you kind of talked about, I mean, first of all, is even before we get to the specifics of what's in the distillery and all of that stuff, which I know you're going to mention, is its place in history in rum making, right? So it's distinct, it's prevalent, it's, I would say, unavoidable for any person who loves rum to not experience some Guyana rum in some way. So, like, if I were making a Mount Rushmore of rum making origins, Guyana has a claim to be on it, right? We're not going to like go through that at length right now, but I think you at least have to have them in the discussion.
I mean, especially when we're talking about molasses-based rums, the first 3 places that always come to mind for me is Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana. Those are just the first three that come to my mind, and I think part of that is because of prevalence and influence, but also its distinctive style, right? And Guyana is what, every rum making country has a style that is distinct to some extent. I would say some countries have styles that stand out more than others as feeling less similar to others,
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
hard to find something that is like this country's rum. And for me, Guyana is one of those countries. The rums that they produce are just very distinct, and it's hard to find places that have a comparable profile. Sometimes you might taste a rum that's like, oh, I get shades of, this type of Guyana rum, but it's rare to find something that's like, oh, like this could have come from Guyana that didn't actually come from there,
Right.
So, and I think we'd be lying if we weren't saying that. I think both of us we've had the rums of Guyana on our minds a lot more since we ended up purchasing a barrel of Guyana rum from the main rum company for our upcoming Rumcast Reserve bottling. So we mentioned in a recent announcement episode that one of those casks is a Guyana rum, VSG rum, distilled on the Versailles single wooden pot still. So I think ever since we did that, I know I've just been like doing a lot more deep dives into Guyana and wanting to taste more Guyanas. Not that I didn't want to previously, because this has always been a place that I've really enjoyed rums from and sought out, but it's just been on my mind more recently. And
It's just a new angle. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of the right time to do the big Guyana rum geek out. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what we're going to do.
And speaking of geek out, I think there's one other reason, and that is, you mentioned, well, it's only one distillery, but that one distillery has a lot
Holds
to it.
multitudes. Yes.
So there's going to be a lot to go over within that one distillery. And oftentimes, one distillery may have one or maybe two stills max, right?
Yeah.
But this distillery's got more than that. And you mentioned this isn't going to be, we don't focus a lot on history, but I think there's some to the historical perspective here we're going to be unable to avoid when we talk about that coming up in that section.
It's a living museum of Guyana's distillation history in a sense. So, before we kind of get into everything, I did want us to talk about, it sounds like we both agree that this is a unique rum and it's distinctive, unmistakable. And I'm curious, like, what makes it that way for you? Because when I look at it, there's sort of three factors. And one of them is, as we were kind of doing all this research for it, I landed on this term that I kind of like, which is, I like to think of them as an archival distillery. So they're not just trying to produce the rums of Diamond Distillery, but also of past closed distilleries as well. And we'll talk a lot more about what I mean by that as we get deeper into the episode. But some of the stills that they have and use are stills that came from distilleries in Guyana that are now closed. Some of these go back hundreds of years. And as I was just kind of gaining a new appreciation for like how fortunate we are as rum enthusiasts to still be able to taste rum from some of these stills, and in some cases rum that is intended to reproduce the style of a previous distillery, not only using stills from a previous distillery, but actually recreating some of those rums of the past. And I was like, it would almost be like if when Caroni had closed, imagine if Angostura had said, we're going to buy some of these stills from Caroni and we're going to keep making some of their marks at Angostura. Like, how cool would that be as a rum enthusiast to know that, like, it's not lost forever, right? Obviously, it's a different version. It's not exactly the same, but it's a chance for it to keep going. So, like, there's this alternate reality where Port Morant rum is just a rum that you read about and wish you could taste, but you can't because the distillery, the last place that the still is closed and the still's gone. Who knows? So that's one of the things that makes it really unique and distinct to me. But what about you?
I just want to touch upon that because that's an incredibly good point that you're making in terms of just how that it could be seen in different places. And what another thing that kind of makes DDL unique is the ability to do that. I was going to touch just a little bit on when you're tasting Guyana rums, like what are some of the things that you're pulling out of there? We're not going to do a whole lot of tasting notes in this episode. I am tasting some Guyana rum right now, but you get this very molassesy, like you mentioned, this is a molasses distillery, right?
Yeah.
And I get more of a molasses flavor out of Guyana than very many other origins. So for me specifically, I always seem to attach that kind of molassesy. There's like a dark chocolate richness or cocoa powder thing to it, and sometimes herbal and earthy notes. Again, depends on the still, depends on a lot of things here, aging, all of that. But the classic, if you will, kind of Guyana gives you some of those notes. I don't think I can think of anywhere else that's come close. You know, as you kind of mentioned. So I think from a flavor profile perspective, that's where I think Guyana stands out.
You mentioned the word richness, and that's one of the first words that I wrote down when I was just trying to reflect on like what comes to my mind when I first start thinking about the flavor profile of Guyana rum. So richness is one thing, and we're going to get into this later in the episode. There was a whole kind of controversy about additives in some of Guyana's rums, and some, you might argue that richness comes from this practice that they had in the past of aging rums with caramel in the barrel. But I still think you can find, like, there's still, if you taste a rum that did not go through that process from Guyana, that richness is still there, right? You can still find incredibly rich rums that didn't have caramel in the barrel when they were aged. So that's something I associate it with it. And then the other thing is, like, I've heard Sean Caleb use this word, and I've heard reviewers use this word when describing some Guyana rums, which is green. And you mentioned the earthiness, herbal notes. I think those are kind of contained within this green label, but there's a particular kind of family of notes I get, particularly from Port Morant rums, that just kind of remind me of like being in the forest, like mossy green type of stuff, and it's really unmistakable when you encounter it, and you get it to varying degrees depending on the rub, depending on the still, depending on where it was aged. But that's just the kind of balance between that and these rich notes that you were describing is really what comes to mind for me. And obviously they can create a huge range of profiles because of the stills, because of the blending expertise they have there. And that's the last thing I'll mention, is that a lot of times distilleries have different philosophies in terms of like what drives their flavor. In Jamaica, a lot of times what you see is flavors that are really driven by like different fermentations, right? Like different marks have different lengths of fermentation time, have different things that go into the fermentation. Like if you look at Hampton 8 mark series, they break a lot of that down. If you go to some of the Latin American countries, we describe a lot of these as like cask driven rums, right? It's all about the aging and the blending to sort of pull out those flavors. And I don't want to say like these are the only levers those distilleries pull. I'm just saying kind of like what's emphasized with them. DDL, I think, is a little bit unique in that distillation for them is like a huge factor and something that they really talk about. The stills that they have there, and their fermentation. It's the same fermented wash that goes into all these stills. It's not exceptionally long, 24 to 30 hours. They have some open air fermentation and some closed fermentation. So in those open air fermentations, obviously you're getting the terroir from like whatever ambient yeasts are there. They do use a dry yeast, so this isn't just like a wild yeast fermentation or whatever. But they use that same fermented wash and everything, with one exception, which we'll talk about later. But it's really then how they pull figuratively how they pull the levers on these stills to really isolate what from this fermentation they want. And so distillation is just really emphasized with them at a higher degree than at other places, I would say. So anyway, all those factors kind of add up to me what really makes this rum unique. So I would love to ask you, how do you tend to recommend Demerara rum to other people? Like if you're talking to someone who's maybe newer, if you like X, you'll like Demerara rum. Like, what is that to you? Do you have good recommendations around that?
I honestly don't. So I thought about this a bit in terms of like, how would I approach this?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I'm not sure there's a really great answer here in terms of we've already established it's a fairly distinct rum style in and of its own.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really sure how I would go. What I would say is if I were talking to a person that had very little or no experience with Demerara rum, I would probably push them into more of the Saval or blends to start. and get them started there, which gives them, just a little inkling of what the distillery can do, and then push them more and more towards things that are a little bit more out there or could be interpreted as funky.
Yeah.
The Port Moran, some of the Versailles, some of those type of things, because I think you can overwhelm somebody if you start there, right? And I've done that actually at my house, where I've poured somebody a Port Moran thinking, they would enjoy it, and they had a rough time with it as a non-rum drinker. So
yeah, I agree. I think this is one of the rare, like we always say rum has something for everybody, right? But that's usually talking about the whole category. I actually think DDL is one of the few distilleries that truly has a rum for everybody, because they can produce so many different types of profiles with varying degrees of intensity and weirdness. And I think especially through El Dorado, they really have a knack for producing blends that have very widespread appeal, right? I think if you're someone whose tastes gravitate towards loving funky, offbeat stuff, they have that. But you may need to go the independent bottler route, like find some Port Moran that's just, single still. They also have the rich and complex. You can go Versailles. There's just lots of different ways you can go. Like you were saying, if you're someone who's newer, maybe you want to intro someone lightly, some of the column still stuff. There's a lot of different stuff in that neighborhood. So that's to me just kind of where they stand out. What was your introduction to Demerara Rum, by the way? Do you remember what the first one you had was?
I think it was Aldo 15. And I remember immediately, we were the same on that. I was immediately gravitated towards its kind of a sweetness, because this was the old El Dorado 15. I do think it was a bit sweeter. And I remember really enjoying it from the first taste type of thing. I remember exact moment where I picked it up. Actually, it was funny. It was in a Publix down here. Publix are the general grocery stores, have liquor stores in some of them. And I picked it up on sale on a July 4th sale where it was $30.
Wow.
And I thought, 32 maybe. And I thought, man, that seems like the right time to buy this. I'm going to take the leap on this. What I saw as a 15-year-old really, seemed like a rich rum. And I really enjoyed it. Then I don't think I came back to it for a while, though, interestingly. So I'll let you talk about your Eldo 15 experience, and then I can talk a little bit more.
No, it's really similar. I think it was a classic kind of gateway rum for me, and it was definitely sweeter back then, the bottle that I had. And I think nowadays I would much prefer the newer bottles of El Dorado 15 that are drier, because, again, they're phasing out that process of aging with caramel in the barrel. But, I still think to this day that's a great rum to introduce people to rum to, because it's complex. It's got some of the wooden stills in the blend in small quantities, so you can taste some few different sides of DDL in there. But I remember at the time that I got it, this probably would have been in like 2016, 2015, sometime around there, and it was like one of my first like nice bottles of rum that I bought. It was probably like 45 or something like that. But I remember also seeing the 15-year age statement, and just like in terms of age with price in the store, it was tough to find something that felt like it would be worth taking the risk on, because it wasn't so expensive that it was like if I don't like this. But anyway, it was instantly like when I tried it, I wanted other people to taste it right away, because it was so approachable and delicious. And so El Dorado 15, I think that's a common story for a lot of people. I mean, the rum's been around since 1992, so it's got quite the legacy that's built up. But with all that said, we're going to get into the episode. We're going to do this in a few different sort of chapters. We're going to start when we come back from the break with just a very quick timeline of rum production in Guyana, just to orient ourselves a little bit. We're going to take a closer look at Diamond Distillery in particular, talk about the individual stills and marks that they produce there, and then we're really going to zoom in on El Dorado and some of the more influential DDL rums over the years, some fun facts about that brand, and just interesting stuff that stood out to us through the course of the research for this episode. We're going to tackle the additives question, and we're also going to look at the Demerara Rum GI, because there's some really interesting things at play there, and I think it's also just kind of a foundational piece of the style now that's happened in recent years. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're just going to celebrate and geek out on all things Guyana Rum. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back.
Stick with us.
Hey, John, you just mentioned that you poured something in your glass. What is that you're drinking right now?
Man, I am drinking our Rumcast Reserve Guyana VSG, soon to be released. Oh, it is just so freaking good. I hadn't tasted it, Will, in like maybe, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, maybe 2.5 weeks since I've gone back to it. And every time I go back to it, I'm just excited to get people to get it in their glass. It's really good.
I am too, and this is maybe the first ever time we've run a little promotion for ourselves in the middle of an episode. So before we get into it, this rum isn't available yet, but it's coming soon, as John said. Some of you have followed our Rumcast Cask project in previous episodes. This is one of the casks that we purchased from Maine Rum that we're going to be releasing as our own single cask bottling soon in the next few months. And we get questions about it, and so we want to give people a way that they can know right away when this release does become available for purchase. So if you're already a Rumcast Patreon member, you don't need to worry. You're going to be the first to know. If you want to be the next to know when this becomes available, you can go to rumcast.com/reserve. That's rumcast.com/reserve. We'll have an email form. You can just type in your email address, and we will send you an email the second that this is available for general release. And we're estimating about 400 something bottles of this release. So
4 to 450 maybe.
Yeah, we made the strategic decision to do 375 milliliter bottles with the hopes of getting this into more hands. So, hopefully it's not, we want anyone who wants this to be able to get it. So make it more accessible. Yes. So again, like we said, if you want more details about this rum, check out our announcement episode. We gave all the details. This is a VSG Versailles still rum. You're about to learn a lot more about what that means in this episode. But if you want to know when this comes out, go to rumcast.com/reserve. We'll send you an email and you won't miss the release. All right, John, with all that said, let's get back to the episode.
All right, so we are back, Will, and we are going to start with talking a little bit an overview, some basic facts, a timeline of Guyana rum production, and a little bit about the country itself, just so insofar as we can help with setting the scene here as we dive way deeper into the distillery and the rum.
All right, let's do it. Take us on a journey, John.
All right, so here's your journey. So Guyana, South American nation on the Caribbean coast. It's sandwiched east of Venezuela and west of Suriname. Right? Did I get that right? Yes.
I think you did.
Yeah. The name comes from the indigenous term that means land of many waters, which is an apt name, of course, since if you look at a map of Guyana, you see that there are tons of rivers and tributaries in it that all run from the highlands out to the Caribbean and the ocean, including 2 that comprise their eastern and western borders. So this is originally the home to many indigenous tribes of people there. Its speculation is that the Arawaks and the Caribs that you may have read about in history that go to the Caribbean islands originated in this area of South America before migrating north and west. Rum enters the picture into Guyana sometime around the late 1600s or early 1700s after the Dutch, especially from one Dutch province in the southwest area called Zeeland, which is where we get our New Zealand name from, colonized the area. That led to the sugar mills, which then led to rum distilling in the area. So this region named Demerara was the name of the original Dutch colonies that make up that modern-day Guyana area, so named after the Demerara River. Interesting to note that the Demerara River itself has always been a fast-flowing river that carries a bunch of silt from those higher altitudes inland, giving it a murky brown color that is well and easily seen all the way off the coast where it spills into the ocean. So the Dutch settled there, right? In the late 1700s, early 1800s, there's a lot of spats on the land here. We know the British eventually start moving in and take over some of that land, hence the eventual connection to the British Navy rum, and Guyana still being grouped to this day as an quote-unquote English-style rum, although I don't think we love the term.
Yeah.
It's then known as British Guyana until its independence in the 1960s, when it becomes Guyana as we know it today. Quick side note, Will, so the Dutch were still there even after the British stayed in that early 1800 period, and you probably know that Suriname used to be called Dutch Guyana, and then you also have French Guiana there to the east of that. But did you know that for a short window of time, there was also Spanish Guiana, which became Venezuela in 1811, and Portuguese Guyana, which is also called Amapa, I believe is how it's pronounced, and that was eventually absorbed into Brazil. So for a period of time, you had a bunch of different Guianas colonial there, and eventually that evens out into what we know today. But back to focusing on Guyana itself and moving forward into the mid-1800s now, British Guyana is producing millions of gallons of rum annually, which, like it sounds, is a lot. And there was a time when British largest colonial rum producer in terms of volume was Guyana, and you had hundreds of distilleries around the country producing rum at that time. But over time, due to centralization, fluctuations in the price of sugar, many of those distilleries and estates begin to close down, and you have fewer and fewer left. And by 1960, when Guyana gains its independence, they're down to just 8 rum distilleries, Will. And this is where you've probably heard these names come in, right? How many do you know off the top of your head?
Let me see. I'm not going to look at the outline.
Okay.
Let's see. IFLOT.
Yep.
I know how to spell IFLOT now. I can do it. UITVLUGT.
That's correct.
All
Well
right.
done. You got a
Skeldon.
Gold star. Skeldon, yep.
Blairmont.
Blairmont.
Albion.
Albion.
Versailles.
Versailles. You're at 5.
Enmore.
Enmore, 6. You got an easy one you should get.
Diamond.
Diamond, that's 7. And
Oh,
one
man,
left.
there's one left.
You've got it. You've got this. You know this because I've heard you mention the name before.
Port Morant.
Port Morant? No.
Okay.
I have La Bonne Intention.
La Bonne Intention. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So you got those 8, right, that you just mentioned. And then from there, let's skip forward a little bit in time to 1999, where every single one of those are closed except for one. Diamond is the last distillery standing. But sort of like the Blob, Diamond's out there enveloping all of these stills and these recipes from all of these other closed distilleries, and many of them remain there to this day.
I was going to say
Take a
it's
deep
more
breath.
like it's like a tractor beam, you know, it's
A
just
tractor beam is a better way. That's less
just
pejorative. Yes.
pulling in all of these stills from these closed distilleries as they're consolidated.
Yeah. I was going to say an amoeba or something, you know, a white
Yeah,
blood
sure.
cell, a macrophage.
Yeah, and obviously that's a very brief overview, and we should give a shout out to some of the excellent rum blogs, articles out there. Matt Petrick, Barrel Age Thoughts, Lance Sears-Bali. A lot of people have put out content that sort of consolidates this information, and we certainly pulled from some of these sources. We'll link to them in the show notes if you want the deeper dives there. But those are kind of great ways to get a primer on sort of, you know, when some of these distilleries came online, when they closed, and that sort of thing. So, but now that we've gone all the way to 1999, we're probably ready to talk about Diamond Distillery. So this was one of the interesting things. I was starting to wonder, like, who actually... I realized I didn't know, like, who owns DDL and Diamond Distillery and El Dorado. I knew that El Dorado, the brand, was owned by DDL and the distillery, but I kind of had no idea. Like, I didn't think that DDL was owned by, like, one of the big spirits conglomerates, but I really didn't know. And so this part was actually pretty interesting. So...
Yeah.
If we want to go deeply, or briefly, I should say, into the history of ownership of Diamond Distillery, at least in its modern iteration. So after independence, which came in the 60s, as you mentioned earlier, Guyana's government nationalizes the sugar and rum industries in the 70s. And you only have 3 distilleries at that point. And each of those distilleries kind of has its own entity attached to it. And all of them, John, have very similar names. I couldn't believe how similar these were, especially from an acronym perspective.
Okay.
So listen to this. So we've got Diamond Liquors Limited, which that's the one at that point associated with Diamond. So it wasn't DDL necessarily yet. It was DLL.
DLL.
Diamond Liquors Limited, DLL.
Okay.
Then you also had Guyana Distillers Limited, GDL, which was
GDL.
associated with IFLOT. And then you did have Demerara Distillers Limited, DDL, which was associated with Enmore, and it was a subsidiary of DLL. So, like, no one really needs to know this. I just thought it was pretty funny that you had DLL, GDL, and DDL back then in the 70s.
It worked pretty well in print, but I imagine in conversations you had to, especially like in a distillery where it was loud, you probably had to say that a few times over.
Oh, yeah. So in 1975, a name that I was certainly familiar with, if you're a rum geek, you may have seen this name before, a very influential name in not only Guyanese rum, but Caribbean rum as a whole, Yisu Persaud. He becomes chairman of DLL, and then in 1983, he kind of leads the charge on merging DLL and GDL to become DDL. So I'm just going to use DDL from here on out.
Thank you.
Make things easy for everyone. So now you have DDL, and DDL owns and operates iFlot, Inmore, and Diamond. In 94, Inmore closes, and in 99, iFlot closes.
Yeah.
And during this time, kind of from the 70s through the 90s, you had more private sector money coming in, and the government's controlling interest in the company is kind of diluted more and more and more until it just goes away. So today, DDL is actually a publicly owned company in Guyana. You can buy shares of it via Guyanese brokers. You can't if you're an American, you can't go on Schwab and buy DDL shares or whatever. You have to go through Guyanese brokers, but you can do this
or something.
Yeah. So as of 2020, according to Kamal Samaru, their current executive chairman, they had about 8,000 shareholders. So as I said, Kamal Samaru, current executive chairman. He's also on the board of directors for National Rums of Jamaica, which owns Clarendon and Long Pond and the Money Musk brand. And oh, by the way, DDL owns 1/3 of National Rums of Jamaica, along with West Indies Rum Distillery / Maison Ferrand and the Jamaican government. They all own an equal 1/3 share of National Rums of Jamaica.
Yeah.
So kind of confusing, but that'll come into play later.
I knew this at some point, but having heard it again just now that the Jamaican government only owns 1/3 of NRJ is just wild in general.
Since it's called National Rums of Jamaica.
Yeah. And it's just an interesting kind of weird, I don't know, thing that DDL has 1/3 of an interest in NRJ itself.
Yeah.
So
I remember I was watching. So Matt Petrick did a interview with Yisu Persaud several years ago. He passed away, I believe, in 2022 or 2023. I think he was in his 90s. But Matt did this sit-down interview, and he was just telling, Yisu was telling all these amazing stories from his career and coming up, and he touched on when that happened, because he was also the chairman of WORSPA at one point. So so many of these Caribbean distilleries are interconnected, and they have relationships. They do things to help each other out sometimes. So I don't know if it was what the situation was, but perhaps NRJ needed some infusion and DDL came in. But anyway, they own 1/3 of NRJ. So Kamal Samaru, executive chairman. Sean Caleb, who we've had on the podcast, he is their head distiller, master distiller, whatever terminology you want to use there. And I believe his technical title is chief production officer, which sounds nice and distinguished. And then you have Sharon Suhang Baksh. She is the master blender and an executive director on the board as well. There's a whole bunch of other people that we could name. I think Sean and Sharon are kind of the two biggest public-facing personalities they have in terms of talking about production and blending there. And obviously they have their hands in a lot of that as well, but they have a huge team. The one thing I learned through the course of this, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is just how big DDL is. It's a lot bigger than I realized. So they also, we won't go into this in detail that much, just to kind of quickly note here, they also do stuff besides rum. So they're doing soft drinks, they do some stuff with Pepsi, from I think some production stuff, some bottling stuff. They have some juice brands. They do a lot of stuff. They do logistics and distribution. It's a big business. I do think rum is still their biggest focus, but these other parts of the business are not just little insignificant factors. They're big contributors to what they do overall.
DDL, more than just rum.
More than just rum. I don't want that to be the tagline. The tagline should be DDL, mostly rum. Let's go with that.
Okay, I like it. And some other things in parentheses.
Yeah. So Diamond Distillery, the name dates back to the Diamond Sugar Estate, which dates back to the 1700s. So when you start counting the stills, I'm being approximate. What I believe is true is I think they're using 10 stills for rum production today. But as I said, they're doing a lot of stuff. They do have some stills there that aren't used for rum production, because they also, they have a gin that they produce and make available locally. And I know they do some vodka as well. So they might have some stills beyond these 10. And I'm pretty sure the 10 that we're going to discuss are used for rum production. But we should start. We're going to run through the stills and give kind of a quick overview of each, some fun facts about them. I think we have to start with Port Morant, right, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the one that people mostly know, all right, especially the rum geeks, has its reputation.
Yes. So
I mean,
tell us about that Port Morant still, John.
yeah, they're spoiled for choice there. We already know that, but the Port Morant still is pretty legendary. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about that one. The Port Morant still, originally at the Albion Distillery, ended up going to the.
Well, I think it was. I think first it was at Port Morant, but kind of like in the modern era, it was at Albion and then Iflot and then Diamond. Yeah.
Sorry, Port Morant originally, then Albion, then it goes to Iflot, and then to Diamond. So this is a well-traveled still. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. It was made itself in 1732, so it's pretty old. I mean, that makes sense that it's been a few different places. It's currently 293 years old, Will.
That's amazing.
So that means in 2032, it will celebrate its 300th anniversary.
Do you think they'll do something special for the 300th anniversary of the Port Morant still?
I can't see how they wouldn't do something, but I'm not sure it's going to be something like 300 doesn't seem the same as like 100. I don't know. That's a silly thing, but
Tricentennial.
Tricentennial, yeah. So some sort of tricentennial bottling would be nice. I'm not sure what they would do, how old it would be. It's obviously not going to be 300 years old. So, is it a 30-year-old? And if so, would the ticket price
you thought
be
John
too high?
was mad about the Appleton 51 release. Just wait until he sees the 300-year-old Port Morant release and the price on that.
$1 billion.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you do. Actually, I think what they would probably do, just noting their kind of history, I could see that just being like 300th anniversary blend and not having an age statement, and having some rums aged, having some old stuff in there, but just making a really delicious blend that really celebrates the Port Morant still. Maybe you do like. If you were going to put an age statement on it, I feel like doing 30-year would be kind of a nice and neat, easy to see the connection between 30 and 300. But my money would be on 300th anniversary single still blend. Is if they do something, that's what I would bet that they do.
I think you're right. I think a 30-year could happen because I still think that's within reach of most people in terms of what a possible price would be. But like you, it's just kind of picking a number out there because it resembles 300 and really nothing else to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We should note what makes this distillery this still, other than being nearly 300 years old, what makes it so unique is its construction. So it's a double wooden pot still. Mm-hmm. They actually refer to these originally in Guyana as vat stills. We're just going to use the word pot because they operate very similarly to pot stills, and most people call them pot stills now. Mm-hmm. But it's made out of greenheart wood, which Sean Caleb talked to us about greenheart wood and gave us some facts. But I started, doing a little research on greenheart wood because I was curious about it. Obviously, this is a wood that is local there in Guyana. I think you can find it in Suriname as well, perhaps if I'm remembering correctly. Okay. But an Amazonian wood, it's one of the hardest, densest woods in the world, which I remember Sean telling us. I did learn it's so dense that it does not float. And it's so hard that, like, if you are dealing with this at a commercial production level, like, they don't use steel saws to cut it because steel is not, like, durable enough to, like, consistently cut this wood. That's how hard it is. They have to use, like, tungsten or something to cut it. Mm-hmm. But also it's super durable in water, so it's used a lot for building docks and things like that. That makes sense as to how it holds up in distillation, with that liquid inside of it. And my favorite little factoid about greenheart wood, John, was that parts of Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, which was used on his doomed voyage to Antarctica, shipwrecked, parts of that ship were built with greenheart wood. So this ship that had to like break through all this ice and stuff like that, it's like, of course you would use this super dense hard wood on it. So
the heaviest you can get, right?
Yeah, but I remember when we had Sean on the podcast, we asked him, because I always heard that, greenheart wood, wooden stills, and these stills obviously have such unique flavor profiles, because the Versailles still is also, we'll get to this, but it's also made from greenheart, and as the Inmore is as well. But we asked Sean, like, how much of the flavor profile of these stills, like, is it actually the greenheart wood contributing to the taste of the spirit? Or is this mostly just like, it's cool that they're wooden, like it sounds cool. And he actually pointed out that because wood is like, doesn't conduct heat as much as something like copper does, it can build more intense pressure inside the still than something like a copper still, for example. And so like the temperature in there can get very, very hot, and that contributes to the flavor profile because like it actually does change distillation It's not just like, oh, it's cool that it's made out of wood. It has an actual effect on the
Yeah.
process. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Well, and if it doesn't conduct heat as well, it also means it cools quicker. So there's an interesting kind of like high temp, less length.
I wonder if you can go and slap your hand on it when it's
this baby right
in the
here
middle of in the middle of a distillation run. I feel like you'd probably get burned on like a copper still doing that, but maybe
not as much.
This is not advice. If you're going on a tour there, don't listen to us and go pat the Port Morant still. Should we have the philosophical debate about this still, John?
I do.
Do you want to do it?
I wanted to.
It feels like we're obligated to.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, and I know we're not the first people to talk about this, but I think it's an important piece, which is for this still and some of the others that are wooden stills, which we're going to talk about, clearly they've been running since the 1700s, in some cases the early 1700s, and over that time, things break, Will, right? Even the hardest greenheart wood is going to break.
Yes.
So, you're going to have to replace some things. So my understanding is that what they're doing is they're replacing just smaller parts and pieces of this wood in the still over time.
They do regular maintenance. Mm-hmm.
Right. So with that being the case, one has to ask, well, at some point they've replaced every single piece of original wood on these
we can
stills.
We can assume. Like we don't know for a fact. Maybe there are certain parts of the still that truly are
It's like
the
a
original.
Solera still.
It's a Solera still. That's amazing. It's the Theseus ship philosophical debate.
Right.
So is it the same still if every part has been replaced, but it's been in use the whole time?
Yes. So do you have an answer for this, Will?
Yeah. To me, it's the same still.
Okay.
Just not, obviously... And again, I'm saying if every part has been replaced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're assuming, we don't know for sure. But as long as you didn't completely take apart everything and then recreate it with all new stuff all at one time, like if it was sort of a continuous maintenance process and it always kind of had the same general shape and there was always like a piece that was from the previous iteration and you've just replaced it over time, to me, like, spiritually, it's still the same still. Physically, maybe it's not, but spiritually, no pun intended, to me, it's the same still.
I think that's a defensible answer, and obviously it's an impossible question, right? If I were to push you on it and say, well, what if I had took every piece of the wooden still that came off it and built another still, which one would it be? Which is the Theseus ship argument, right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
And then you're like, so there's not really a good answer here. I'm going to go with you. I do think because of the way it's done in that over time, it's occupying the same physical space.
Right. Right? Yeah.
And it not only that, but you have to think that at any one time, this all didn't happen at once, so it's just a little bit that's being added to, and then everything works continuously with it.
Right.
So it's whatever percentage you want to say at that point, 95%, the same still it was. And then that then takes on some amount of time of being in its role before the next one's replaced. So long story short, I think we're in the same position with it. I don't think there's a good answer for it. I do wish I had all the original wood and could build my own original Port Morant still.
I like to think that someone's just been like saving all the original, like every time it's refurbished, they take the scraps and they're just like, soon I'll have, the original.
Soon I'll have enough.
Yeah, exactly. But what the Port Morant still is known for is the aptly named PM mark. This is the main historical mark associated with the still. It's the primary one made on the still today. We're not going to run through like every single mark when we talk about these. Sometimes you'll hear of certain rums coming from the Port Morant still that are done in like the fashion of a previous distillery. Like there have been some Port Morant releases that have Albion on the label and things like that. So, they can do some different stuff with it, but the PM mark I think is the one to really be aware of. Another thing, speaking of like Theseus ship and everything, I was going back and listening to our interview with Sean, and one of the things that he noted was that when the Port Morant still came to Diamond from Iflot, a lot of the team, like the distilling team from Iflot, also came to Diamond. And again, this would have been back in around 1999, if I'm remembering correctly. And so a lot of the team that they have at the distillery today, many of them got to work with some of those people who came from Iflot. So it's not just these physical stills going from place to place. You also have this sort of like generational transfer of knowledge,
Yeah.
that there's a through line. And I'm sure if you went back to iFlot, like maybe there were some people at iFlot who also, worked at Inmore or out, like, there's probably more knowledge transfer because the stills that came to iFlot were other places before they came there. So there's just this really cool through line going all the way to Diamond today that, again, like, that's kind of why I keep thinking of it in my mind as this archival distillery. It's maintaining the past and like keeping this stuff alive, which is so cool.
I don't think you can underestimate that as a part of this, right? If you were to somehow take this still out from one day to the next, if I could magically transport it to some other place and have all wholly different people running it, even though it's the same still, it wouldn't be the same thing anymore.
No.
So
No.
I agree.
And just as we were talking earlier about, like, stills being such a big factor in their rum style, like the fermentation is too, because of those open tops and ambient yeast contributing to the flavor profile. If you took the Port Morant still and, like, let's say, God forbid, for some reason DDL ceased to exist and another rum producing, kind of like how St. Lucia Distillers has bought, like, one of the stills that they have was previously at Angostura.
Right.
It's not like their rum tastes like Angostura. So if someone in Jamaica bought the Port Morant still and they made rum with it in Jamaica, it would taste completely different from the Demerara rum.
Right. It retains some of its history, but it's altogether a different product at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so next up, the Versailles still will stay in the wooden pot still family. This is the single wooden pot still, also made from green heartwood. This still not quite as old as the Port Morant. I believe the date is 1890 around the manufacture of this still. So got a ways to go before we get to its 300th birthday or even its 200th birthday. So maybe John, I don't know, can we make it to 2090? Do you think we'll still be around?
Oof, I don't know. I might be partaking a little bit much to make it to 2090.
I
don't know if I want to make it to 2090.
We might not get around to the 200th anniversary of Versailles still rum. But yeah, so the main marks associated with this still the VSG, which we mentioned earlier in our shameless plug for our own Rumcast Reserve VSG coming soon. You also have the Rev mark, REV, which is a caramel colored variant of the VSG mark. So you've got the Raising Glasses Moongazer bottle right there.
Yep.
Yes, that is a Rev mark. So that's one made for, sometimes DDL has certain customers that want more caramel added to the rum for a darker color to achieve a certain profile. And so the Rev mark is one that has been available to certain customers over the years, and you'll still find independent bottlers occasionally releasing Rev marks as well. And, Moongazer, I don't know, because I have not had that many Rev bottles that I can remember. And Moongazer does have a very distinct profile. It's very different from other Versailles rums that I've had, and I don't know how much of that has to do with it being the Rev mark and how much of it has to do with just that specific cask. That's kind of one of the things with single cask rums is you can get ones that are just off profile for whatever reason, right? Anyway, and then there's also the KFM mark, which is kind of a historical mark that they can produce now, but you don't see it quite as much. I believe VSG is kind of the main one these days.
Had you seen, Will, for the Rev mark, that there's a little bit of debate over like what that actually means?
So there's a little bit of debate over every single one of these marks, which is like, there's actually, I was going to bring this up later, but like we'll link to this in the show notes. There's a forum thread, the Rum X app, John. So they have a forum on there, and there is a thread on that forum called Crowdsourcing Guyana Rum Marks.
Yeah,
and this might be like, so we complain about the internet all the time, but occasionally I feel like the more you get into niche communities on the internet, the more helpful the internet can be.
Yeah.
This is like one of the most wholesome enthusiasts coming together and just working as a team to try to like find out as much information as they can about marks. This thread goes back like 4 maybe 5 years at this point,
Yeah.
and you can go and read through the whole thing, and it's people all over the world working together trying to crowdsource, like, when did this mark become a thing, what was the original estate it was associated with,
It's pretty impressive. Yeah.
what type of still was it originally distilled on, and now when DDL makes this mark, what still are they using, because DDL, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway, yeah, what were you? There's wide mysteries around all of these marks, and what's the true identity? What do they mean? That sort of thing.
First of all, I believe we should call it the Hookinga principle from now on. That the more niche a community is online, the more helpful it will be.
Yeah, I think that's probably consistently true, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
it works for me. So I was going to say with the Rev mark that because the Versailles still was once located at Enmore, like you were saying, that there's some people that say that the E in Rev stands for Enmore, rectified Enmore Versailles, right?
Ah.
Other people say it's rectified extreme Versailles, and I've seen some other ones too, and I'm like, I don't know about
rectified extreme Versailles.
Extreme, yeah. I don't know.
That sounds too like American.
It does sound a little American, yeah. But I felt that was interesting to see, like you were pointing out. There's so many different ways of looking at some of these decoding, like. These type of marks, yeah.
Well, and sometimes you'll encounter a mark where it's like a main rum internal mark for the same, like
that gets even more difficult. Yes.
So it's like it's a VSG, but at Maine they happen to call it XYZ. Instead.
And it does seem like there's at least some possibility that some of these were lost.
Yeah.
Like that they're like just like, well, we think it stands for this, but no one ever wrote it down, or something like that. Or it was lost. So people are remaking it.
This is on my brain because you held up the Raising Glasses Moongazer. So they did another Guyana, the King Kai.
Yes.
And the mark that they were told it was is something called ELRW. And like nobody knows what this mark is. Like I was going through that Rum X thread and someone listed it on there and people were just like, I've never seen this. And like these people have seen all of the marks everywhere. So yeah, there's just it's a wild rabbit hole. I do think we can safely say that they are capable of producing like over 20 marks at Guyana right now. Like I've heard that from interviews with Sean and Sharon in recent history. So they're still able to make a lot of these. But let's go to the Enmore still now. So this is rounding out the Green Heartwood stills.
Yes. So this is the Enmore that was originally at Enmore and then moved to Iflot. This goes back to about 1880. It's a 2-column continuous coffee still, also made, as you mentioned, from the Green Heartwood. It is the only wooden column still in operation today, I believe. Maybe there's some we don't know about. I don't know.
That's the claim. Only in existence.
Yeah. They make the EHP mark, which who knows, but people say it may stand for Edward Henry Porter, who inherited the still early on in its lifespan, or maybe it's completely something different. But notable was
extra high proof.
Yeah, there you go. Enmore horizontal plate was one I saw also.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious, which I was like, really interesting. Right. So one notable thing with Enmore was Sean Caleb, that when we talked to him, he said it was his favorite still. And it's notoriously finicky, he said, to operate, which makes it interesting. To me, if something is finicky and you can get something really good, but it takes a little bit more talent from it,
right?
I don't know. There's an appeal there to me somehow. I don't know why, but I think it's an interesting one nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. So that's the start of the column stills. We're going to keep it in the column still family. Saval stills, we have these next. There's 2 of these. These were at Iflot first. So you have the Saval 1, Saval 2, 4 columns and all. These are metal stills. The first one goes back to 1921, the second to the 80s. And Sean also told us that these stills are the most complex out of all of them to operate. Mm-hmm. And they were actually I thought this was really cool. These were the first ones that he learned to operate. So he kind of like started with the hardest. And it was like, if you can do these, you can learn all of them, right? There's a lot that they can do with these stills. They're very, very versatile. And they, a bunch of marks that are tied to previous estates, they use this still, or these stills, the Saval stills, to recreate these marks. So some of these are ICBU, which was an Iflot mark, SWR, that was originally a Skeldon mark, LBI, Le Bon Intention, and several other marks as well. So many of these marks were not originally produced on these stills, but because of the versatility of these stills and because they have lots of internal reference points for these marks. They are able to calibrate these in a way where they can reproduce rums that are faithful to the original flavor profile. Now, how faithful, I have no way of knowing. That would actually be a really interesting
I don't
exercise.
think anybody has a way of knowing.
Well, I mean, it depends like how far back their samples go, right? So like if they have still retained samples of some of these original marks, being able to A/B them, that would be pretty fascinating. I don't know what reason they would have to like just allow, you know, some random podcaster to come in and see how close they are. But that would be pretty cool. But that's at least like, that's, if you talk to the people at DDL about this, that's what they'll tell you. They're open about it, right? It's not like they're trying to hide this. So I think that's pretty cool. You want to talk about the DHE still?
Before we get to the DHE, I was gonna say I wish I could sort of be a fly, a very long-lived fly on the wall during all of that time, because it just feels like, you know, DDL is just saying like, oh, this good, yeah, we'll take that still. Oh, there's two, okay, we'll take both.
Well, I mean, like they could have. We talked to Sean about this, but like they could have taken even more. Like they could have retained more of these stills to do like some of these marks on the stills, but it was kind of like their philosophy was, we feel like we can get close enough with
just these two
Saval stills.
Yeah. But I find that interesting. I guess you're right. They didn't say bring me everyone. Right? They stopped short of that.
Right.
All right. So let's talk about the Diamond High Ester still, the DHE. So this is a John Doerr double retort pot still that was used to create their DHE mark. And very interestingly, everywhere you see this discussed, people say it's from the 1950s, but according to Sean, it's actually a smaller demonstration still that's also made by John Doerr that dates back to the 50s. And the current DHE still that they're using is essentially a larger version, also by John Doerr, that was made in the 80s. So a little interesting factoid there in terms of some of the history of it. Sean was contrasting that approach to high ester rum with the Jamaican approach. He talked a lot about that with us. And he says DDL's high ester would be like, quote, high ester without the funk. End quote.
Yeah, they kind of like, it's interesting because high ester is one of those terms that you hear it and everyone thinks one thing, but like it's used in lots of different ways. And it's something I kind of forgotten about. I went back and listened to our interview, and Sean was really emphasizing like they don't, if you're comparing it to Jamaica's high ester process, DDL isn't as big on like trying to emphasize the production of bacteria in the process, because the Jamaican method uses a lot of bacteria to generate esters. And Sean essentially said like they didn't want to do it that way because when you use bacteria for that, it brings a lot of heavier other heavier components into the flavor profile as well that they don't necessarily want in their rum. So the way he put it was they want more like starches and sugars in the process, and one of the things that gives them that is adding local fruit into the fermentation, which is interesting that he brought that up, because I know they do that at Hampton as well. Like they've talked about I think jackfruit, maybe pineapple. I'm not sure which fruits they use at DDL. They're willing to talk about the process, but they want to leave a little bit of the secret sauce a secret. So he did refer to like they have some method that he said is unique for creating a really big spike in esters. And so it would be interesting to see what that is. But
and to date, because I haven't tried the Diamond product itself, I don't think. But to date, the only one that is that one that was released, what was it, a year or two ago now?
The high ester blend.
The high ester blend. And both of us didn't really feel like we were in love with it. A lot of people do like it quite a bit.
Yeah.
But it did prove the point of what we're talking about now. Like, it certainly isn't a high funk type of rum.
Well, and the other factor in that is like that rum was a blend, right? So it was the DHE mark and the LBI, Le Bon Intention, so Saval column still rum in there as well. And we have no idea like how high a percentage of the blend was DHE, right? Yep. We do know like El Dorado has generally said that their pot stills make up very small amounts of the overall rum that they produce. So like when you taste El Dorado 15, for example, it has some Port Moran, it has some Versailles in there. But just based on what they've said and based on the flavor profile, I think it's relatively small percentages of the blend. So I like the high ester blend, it could have been like, 5% DHE and 95% LBI. We really have no way of knowing. And I haven't found a release that is just pure DHE. And I think that's by design. Like I think El Dorado looks at it as like, this is a blending component for us, and that's how we use it, right? It's not about trying to give rum geeks the like our version of DOK, right?
Right.
I don't think that's what it's about for them. And yeah, I mean, we tasted a Port Morant DHE blend in Maine Rum's warehouses, which was just a sherry bomb because it was in a sherry cask. But so I still feel like I don't really know what DHE tastes like. So they have a second release coming up in that High Ester Blend series, which is a PM DHE blend. And one of our patrons in the Rumcast Discord just mentioned that he got to try it at a tasting in Chicago. And so hopefully that means it's going to be available on U.S. shelves soon, because I'd love to try another one. Continuing on.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up quickly. There's some more column stills. There's the Diamond 1 and Diamond 2. These are metal coffee stills installed in 1950 at Diamond. And then there's the Diamond 3, which is another metal coffee still installed in 2011. So one
Creative
of the newer
names.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it easy enough to remember. And then lastly, they had this great big 5-column MPRS still, which stands for multi-pressure rectification still, that was also installed at Diamond in 2011. So, obviously
count.
They don't give the breakdown of like which of these stills make up the majority of their rum. I would imagine that like that 5-column still is making a lot of rum. And really all of the column stills are probably being used a lot to sort of like make the foundations of a lot of these rums. Yeah, but it's just cool to really see everything they're able to do with these, everything they're able to try to keep alive from past marks to present marks and everything. All right, so I feel like we need to do our own personal still rankings. Which ones do we tend to like the most? And I'm going to let you kick us off, John.
Okay.
And we're going to focus on the ones that are widely available to taste as single stills. Like, I don't really have a strong take on the multi-pressure rectification still, because I don't know whether or not I've ever had an expression that's just from that still. So I think we're going to focus like mostly on the wooden stills and the Saval, probably is what it's going to come down to.
I think so. And for me, I mean, I imagine we're going to be different here, but maybe not. For me, it's the Versailles still in the top of my ranking, partially because I think it brings a really nice balance. It has some of that uniqueness that we discussed earlier to it, but it doesn't bowl you over. It still takes well to aging. I think it gives a lot of balance of sweetness in those green notes. It's distinct. Like we've talked about before, you really get this Versailles je ne sais quoi in there that is pleasing to me. So I've had more than one Versailles still release that I've really enjoyed. So it slots into number one for me. What about you?
So I have Port Morant number one.
I figured that might be.
But I will say that to me, it's kind of Port Morant and Versailles are on a tier of their own. Mm-hmm. And then it's not that there's like a drop in quality. It's just like in my enjoyment level, those are the two at the top for me. And they're very close, like neck and neck. I just think Port Morant is a little bit more, these are both very distinctive stills. Port Morant to me is a little bit more distinctive, like on average across all the expressions. And then also I think I'm just a little bit of a sucker for like it dating back so far in history and still being in use. Like, it's just like, I know that shouldn't factor into my enjoyment, but it does a little bit if I'm being totally honest. So that one for me is number one. Versailles is a very close second, though.
Okay.
When we were at Maine Rum, we tried Port Morant rums and we tried Versailles rums, and we came away with a Versailles rum, and that was because of taste, not because of price. So like the highs can be just as high. Port Morant for me is there's just something kind of mystical about it, I feel like.
There really is. So the reason I have Versailles number one is because I think I've more consistently enjoyed every release I've tried from them, as opposed to Port Morant, which hit or miss is too strong, like to say.
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, but there's some Port Morants that I just have not liked or engaged in, or definitely didn't purchase. Whereas there's others. I'm actually sipping on the Guyana Albion right now, which, as we mentioned earlier, is from the Port Morant, and it's phenomenal. It's a great rum, and I'm super glad to have it. It's just in that category for me, so which I put it kind of like tier 1 is Versailles and tier 2 is Port Morant and Saval.
Wow, you got
Which
Port Morant a whole tier down from Versailles?
Yeah, I feel like I do because of the reason I just said. But
Wow.
and I'm gonna get super flamed for it because I know people are love Port Morant out there.
The pitchforks are coming out.
It's not to say anything negative about Port Morant for all the reasons you said. I agree with you. I think it is distinct. I think it is historical. It's a lot of value there. For me personally, as a rum drinker, I think it can be that kind of hit or miss. So. The Saval still, I find, is another one that I really engage with and appreciate over multiple releases. The Hamilton series that came out, I really thought that was a good value and a good rum, and really enjoyed it for that reason. So that's kind of where I have it. And then before you go to your next ones, I'm just going to say this outright. I have a tier 3, and it's for an interesting reason, because I can't remember a fucking time when I've had an Enmore series still alone. I went back into my notes, I looked through a bunch of things, and I was like, I'm not sure I've ever had an Enmore still release.
I think Enmore rums, speaking as an American, I think they're harder to find in terms of IB releases here. I know when Hamilton did a ton of single still rums at Cask Strength, he definitely had an Enmore in there. And I think that I definitely tried one of those Enmores that he released, but I'm trying to remember like what other Enmores I've had. It's a little bit cloudy. So my opinions on Enmore versus Saval are a little less strong just because I still need to do more exploration there. In my memory, I have them like roughly around each other in terms of my enjoyment of the ones I've had, with Enmore just a slight nod to that. Because that Hamilton Enmore that I had like really does stand out in my mind for some reason. So, but those are the ones that's kind of on my list. Like I really want to explore more of those going forward.
Yeah. So we're pretty close, but it sounds like we both want to explore more Enmore if we can get it here in the US.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can. So, got to make that happen. Okay, in terms of like how if someone is listening and they're in the boat of like, I'd really love to try these single stills or just like try more of DDL in general, what is your kind of recommendation for that? I had kind of an idea of like, let's say you had a budget of $500 or somewhere around there. We're not going to be super strict with this, but if you have $500 to taste as much Guyana rum as possible with the goal of exploring the category and kind of expanding your knowledge of the various flavor profiles that come out of the distillery, how are you going to spend it, or how do you recommend someone spends it?
It's really tough, and honestly, I don't know that I'd recommend spending $500 to start with on just Guyana. But if you're a person...
let's say they're not just beginning their rum journey. And they've decided, I want the Guyana deep dive, and I'm going to dedicate some
If I had to
budget
rebuild my collection right now, where am I spending my money? I get what you're saying. Surprisingly, it's Eldo 12 over Eldo 15, which I didn't learn till years into my rum journey. And I had mentioned way earlier in the episode that El Dorado 15 is where I started. I enjoyed it and then kind of left it on the shelf forever. And when I came back to it, I liked it less. And then as I finally got to try Eldo 12 later, I was like, man, this is way better for my palate now. So, count me on the Eldo 12 side in between those two. So I think it starts there, which is cheap, right? It's $30 or whatever it is. I think I would want to get a couple of the things. So the Versailles still, as I mentioned, as being my favorite. There's a few things out there. If I could ever source a Versailles like Vellier or another IB, including our own, I think I want that. As weird as that is to say. But, I want some sort of Versailles higher strength single still release. So the Moon Gazer, like we mentioned, comes to mind. Something along those lines. You have to have a Port Morant also. Yeah. So, Port Morant's going to be something, whether it's the Albion. There's a good amount of Port Morant releases out there from IBs that I think we have some decent choice for. So it would be choosing one of those, trying not to overspend on it for me. But if I can spend between that $100, $150 range, I think I would be happy with that. And then maybe it's some of the Black Tot stuff that has a real strong Guyana background in it. It's got more things, or some of the other ones that I think bring something a little bit different. So that's kind of where my perspective profile goes. What about you? Are you much different than that, or I would
No,
imagine you're gonna? Yeah.
I'm pretty close actually. So I think either Eldorado 12 or Eldorado 15 is kind of like an essential place if you're really starting out, like, because those are such foundational blends. And I will say that I tend to prefer Eldorado 12 to 15 as well. Like when we tasted those back to back, I lean 12, which is really interesting because the 15 actually has more of the wooden stills than the 12 does. We'll talk about the blend breakdown a little bit later, but like 15 has Port Morant and Versailles, and I don't think either of those are in the 12, which is it's just kind of funny. So if you like really want to be able to taste a blend that has like as many of the wooden stills as possible, then probably go with the 15, but you won't go wrong with the 12 either. I think so. Port Morant and Versailles are the single stills that I'm prioritizing in this journey. And you can't go wrong if you want to throw in more. I mean, Sean Caleb told us that's his favorite
Saval,
still. So yeah, Saval and more. Just for me, Port Morant and Versailles are the ones that I've had the most of, and the ones that I just really really like. So what I will say is, El Dorado has done some single still expressions. They've even done some single still cask strength expressions in recent years. What I would say is, when you go into the independently bottled realm of DDL rum, most of what you find is going to be rum that was aged in Europe. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The rum that we bottled was aged 100% in Liverpool. So it was shipped in like a tote and not put into cask until it was far away from Guyana. Those rums can be phenomenal. What I will say is there are like it's really interesting to taste the differences that come out in aged at origin, tropically aged Guyana rum versus ones that were aged elsewhere, mostly in Europe. And for me, I don't want to paint it as a black and white thing where it's like, if you taste a tropically aged Guyana, you're going to taste X, Y, and Z. And when you taste a one aged in the UK, you're going to taste X, Y, and Z every time, because it depending on the barrel, there's all kinds of different things that can weigh, but you will notice differences. So what I will say after this long meandering lead up to a comment is, I would try to get 2 to 3 rums from the Port Morant and Versailles stills and have at least one of them be aged in a different location. So whether that means you find 2 that are aged in the UK, also get one that's cask strength and aged at origin. And you can find those from some IBs as well. Like I just picked up one a few weeks ago that's a Port Morant that was bottled by I think Single Cask Nation, and it was aged entirely in Guyana. So you can find those too, or you can get the ones, again, the El Dorado branded ones are all going to be aged at origin. So, but I just think like being able to experience both is pretty cool and gives you like a full picture of sort of the breadth of DDL rum that's out there.
Yeah. I didn't mention something, but as you're talking about those El Dorado releases, those limited edition releases, they have the single still releases. Yeah. They have those cask strength releases, right, that are out there. My opinion is those are priced too high for what they are. And so I would stay away from them.
Well, so what's the price on the cask strength ones?
Like $300?
No, they're not $300.
In between $200 and $300?
No way.
Well, maybe not, because I'm seeing some here that are not.
Yeah. So the weird thing about these is, I think what you're remembering is the 40% ones. So the non-cask strength, just 80 proof. Those are all priced like around $100 or above, which I agree with you is overpriced. But the weird thing was, when they came out with the cask strength editions, they were more expensive, but like not that much more expensive. So if I saw like an El Dorado Port Morant cask strength at like $140 or something like that, to me, I wouldn't say that's for sure overpriced. It might, you might be able to find an IB one that is cask strength and a little cheaper, but they're definitely not $200 or $300.
I have a distinct memory of seeing at least one that was in that range when it first came out. And I'm checking through online now. I see all of the single still ones that are in between that range, what you're talking about. but I'm struggling to find the cask strength ones.
I'm
right
seeing cask
now.
strength
There's one.
127, 100.
I see 146.
149.
Yeah. So they are. It looks like they are a little cheaper than I thought.
122.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think they're reasonable. The 80 proof ones are overpriced. I agree with that.
There's 189.
And,
So
and
okay, still not $300.
online prices are kind of unreliable anyway, but they're under $200, I would say, in general.
I've seen them here in Miami for over 200. I guarantee.
Well, you're getting gouged in that case. The last thing I'll note is, I think you mentioned this, but I think another sort of foundational way to experience a Demerara rum is in the context of a blend. And there's a whole big chunk of DDL history that's tied to Navy rum, right? Which we didn't really spend any time going into that because this isn't a history podcast, but there's a lot more, lore you can learn there. But one of the coolest ways to taste DDL rum is in the context of a blend, because it just has a way of standing out, but also working in harmony with other rums. I think one of my favorite rums I've ever tried was Vellier's first Tiger Shark blend. So they've done a couple of those.
Oh, what?
I bought a bottle of like the second one that they did, but the first one they did, I did not find a bottle of, but I actually had the last sip of it from the bottle that was at Black Parrot when we were there in London. And that first blend was crazy good and like really had a lot of old Demerara influence in it. Samaroli has done some in recent years that had some like really old Demerara rums. Black Tot has done some, like, find the Black Tot Master Blenders Reserve releases and like look at the blend breakdown, and the ones that are heavy on the DDL influence, like try grabbing one of those. I think tasting those rums in that context is really amazing. So that would be kind of how I would prioritize the budget.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other ones that are cask finishes that El Dorado has done as well, which I don't have a lot of experience with. And again, I feel like they were priced very highly, so I haven't really gotten a chance to do that. But I know they're out there. Like you said, I think, I'd stick to... I didn't mention also, El Dorado 3 is a great product. They make really good stuff. I just think I would more likely stick to their core lineup. Yeah,
and I think like we're primarily focused on stuff people would sip, so like El Dorado 12 to me is kind of the threshold for like from their flagship line where you can start to appreciate a little bit more. I'm not saying if you sip El Dorado 8 it's like you're going to be spitting it out or anything. It just doesn't have the complexity and depth that the
for sipping experience.
Yeah. So all right, thanks so much, everyone, for listening to part 1 of the Rumcast Guide to Guyana Rum. Like I said, we'll be back next week with part 2, where we'll go deep into the modern legacy and influence of El Dorado, Demerara Distillers Ltd, and some of the more prominent independent bottlings over the years, along with the question of additives in Demerara rum and the Demerara Rum GI. So still a lot more to discuss. Looking forward to getting part 2 out later in about a week. And in the meantime, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, you can always email us, host@rumcast.com. That's HOST@rumcast.com. Or you can find us on social media. We're basically at the Rumcast in most platforms. You can find us there. All right, with all that said, we'll be back soon. Cheers, everyone.